The knock came 3 times, soft, uncertain, barely audible over the howling wind. Elias Crow hadn't heard a human sound in 6 months, and now, at midnight in a blizzard that could kill a man in minutes, someone stood at his cabin door. He reached for his rifle by instinct, every muscle tense. When he opened it, he found a woman collapsed against the frame, her lips blue, 2 children clinging to her skirts like ghosts. Blood stained the snow behind them. Whatever had driven them up this god-forsaken mountain in winter wasn't mercy, it was terror. If you want to see how a mountain hermit becomes an unlikely protector, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The wind screamed through the pines like something wounded and furious, shaking the cabin's timber walls with enough force to rattle the tin cups hanging above the stove. Elias Crow sat in the dark, listening. He'd learned long ago to read the mountain's moods, the difference between a storm passing through and one settling in to punish the world. This was the latter. He didn't light the lamp, didn't need to. The fire in the stone hearth cast enough orange glow to see the room he'd built with his own hands 15 years ago. A table hewn from lodge pole pine, 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserved goods in mason jars, furs stacked in the corner, a rifle mounted above the door. Everything had its place. Everything obeyed a rhythm he'd carved from solitude. Then came the knock. 3 times. Soft. Human. Elias went still, every sense sharpening. In 6 months, he hadn't seen another soul. The nearest settlement was 12 miles down a trail that disappeared under snow from October to April. No one came up here. No one had reason to. That was the point. He rose slowly, reaching for the rifle. His hands moved with the practiced calm of a man who'd learned that panic got you killed faster than cold or hunger. He checked the chamber, loaded, and approached the door without making a sound on the floorboards. Another knock. Weaker this time. Elias hesitated, then gripped the iron latch and pulled. The wind roared in, carrying snow that stung his face like buckshot. And there, framed in the doorway, was a woman. She fell forward before he could react, hitting the floor with a sound that told him she had nothing left. Behind her, 2 children stood frozen in the snow, a boy, maybe 10, with eyes too old for his face, and a girl no more than 6, clutching a bundle wrapped in rags. "Please," the woman whispered from the floor, her voice barely a rasp. "Please." Elias didn't ask questions. He grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him inside, then scooped up the girl with one arm and kicked the door shut behind them. The cabin plunged back into firelit warmth, but the cold they'd brought with them lingered, on their clothes, in their skin, in the desperate silence that filled the space between breaths. The woman tried to push herself up and failed. Her hands were cracked and bleeding, her dress soaked through beneath a coat that wouldn't have kept a dog warm. The boy stood rigid, protective, positioning himself between Elias and his sister. The girl didn't make a sound, just watched with wide, glassy eyes. "Sit," Elias said, pointing to the chairs near the fire. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He hadn't used it in weeks. The boy didn't move. "Sit," Elias repeated, softer this time. "You're safe here." The boy's jaw worked. Then he nodded once and guided his sister to the nearest chair. She climbed into it, still clutching her bundle, and the boy stood beside her like a sentinel. Elias turned to the woman. She'd managed to prop herself against the wall, shivering so hard her teeth clacked together. He crouched beside her, keeping his movements slow, deliberate. "Can you stand?" She nodded, but when she tried, her legs gave out. Elias caught her under the arms and half carried her to the second chair. She sank into it with a sound like relief and pain mixed together. "How long you been out there, Tsut?" Elias asked, moving to the stove. He pulled down a pot, filled it with water from the barrel, added a handful of dried sage and yarrow. The herbs wouldn't cure frostbite, but they'd help with the shock. 3 days, the woman said. Her voice was hoarse, broken. "Maybe 4. I lost track." Elias glanced at the children. The girl's lips were still blue. The boy's hand shook despite his rigid posture. 3 days in this storm. They should be dead. He poured the heating water into 3 tin cups and handed them out. "Drink slow. Too fast and you'll be sick." The woman wrapped her hands around the cup like it was salvation itself. The boy took his but didn't drink, just held it and watched Elias with the kind of suspicion that came from experience. The girl sipped hers, then made a face at the bitter taste of the herbs. "Tastes like dirt," she whispered. "Emily," the boy said sharply. "It's all right," Elias said, surprising himself. He pulled a jar of honey from the shelf and drizzled a spoonful into her cup. "Better?" She nodded, the ghost of a smile flickering across her small face before disappearing again. Elias returned to the stove and started pulling down supplies: cornmeal, dried venison, an onion from the root cellar beneath the floorboards. He worked in silence, letting the fire do its job, letting warmth creep back into their bones before demanding answers. The woman spoke first. "My name is Lydia Hale," she said quietly. "This is Noah and Emily." Elias didn't turn from the stove. "Elias Crow." "I know." That stopped him. He looked over his shoulder, studying her face in the firelight. Mid-30s maybe. Sharp features softened by exhaustion. Dark hair plastered to her head, eyes the color of creek water, gray-green and deep. "You know me?" "I know of you," Lydia said. "People in Flatridge talk. The mountain man who lives alone. The one who doesn't come down except once a year for supplies." Elias turned back to the stove. "People talk too much. They also say you're the only man in 50 miles who might help someone without asking questions first." He stirred the cornmeal mush, watching it thicken. "They're wrong." Lydia's hands tightened around her cup. "Mr. Crow, you don't owe me your story tonight," Elias said, cutting her off. "You're half frozen and running on nothing but fear. Eat, sleep. We'll talk in the morning." He didn't miss the way her shoulders sagged with relief, or the way Noah's grip on his cup finally loosened just a fraction. Elias served the food in wooden bowls, simple fare, hot and filling. The children ate like wolves, too hungry for manners. Lydia ate slower, but with the same desperate edge. Elias took his own portion and sat on the floor near the hearth, giving them space. The storm battered the cabin walls, but inside the only sounds were the crackling fire and the scrape of spoons on wood. When the bowls were empty, Lydia set hers aside and looked at Elias with something that might have been gratitude or might have been guilt. "The bed's yours," Elias said, nodding toward the corner where a simple frame held a straw mattress covered in furs. "I'll take the floor." "We can't." "You can," Elias said flatly, "and you will." Lydia opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She rose unsteadily and guided the children toward the bed. Emily climbed in first, still holding her bundle. Noah sat on the edge, unlacing his boots with stiff, frozen fingers. "Noah," Lydia said gently, "it's safe. Sleep." The boy looked at Elias, then at his mother, then nodded. He lay down beside his sister, and Lydia covered them both with the furs. She smoothed Emily's hair back from her face, whispered something Elias couldn't hear, then straightened and returned to the fire. "Thank you," she said. Elias didn't answer. He banked the fire for the night, added 2 logs that would burn slow and steady, then pulled down a wool blanket from the shelf and spread it near the hearth. Lydia stood there a moment longer, then returned to the bed and lay down on the far edge, careful not to disturb the children. Within minutes, the sound of deep, exhausted sleep filled the cabin. Elias sat with his back against the stone hearth, rifle across his knees, and listened to the storm. He should have turned them away, should have pointed them back down the mountain, sent them to Flatridge where there were families, neighbors, people who knew how to handle refugees from bad situations. But he hadn't. And now they were here, in his cabin, in his space, disrupting the silence he'd built his life around. He looked at the bed. 3 shapes beneath the furs, rising and falling with breath. The woman, Lydia, had her arm around the little girl. The boy slept with one hand fisted in his mother's sleeve, even in unconsciousness unwilling to let her go. Elias turned away and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he'd get the truth. Morning came late and gray, the storm still raging outside with no sign of breaking. Elias woke to the smell of coffee, his coffee, and opened his eyes to find Lydia standing at the stove, already dressed, her hair pulled back and damp from washing. "I hope you don't mind," she said when she noticed him watching. "I thought I could at least make myself useful." Elias sat up, folding the blanket with automatic precision. You know how to work a stove like that? I've been keeping one going for 12 years, Lydia said. Since I was married. There it was, the past tense. Elias rose, pulled on his boots, and joined her by the stove. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking, and he took it, surprised by the gesture. It was good coffee, better than he usually bothered with. She'd found the sugar tin and used it sparingly, the way someone did when they knew what scarcity meant. The children? He asked. Still sleeping. They need it. Elias nodded and moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. Snow fell in thick, relentless curtains, the pines bent under the weight. Nothing moved out there except the storm. You'll be here a few days, he said. Storm like this doesn't quit easy. I know. He turned to face her. And you're going to tell me why you were out in it. Lydia's hands tightened around her own cup, but she met his eyes steadily. Yes. They sat at the table, the same one where last night the children had eaten like they hadn't seen food in a week. Lydia stared into her coffee for a long moment, gathering herself, then spoke. My husband died 8 months ago, Samuel. He was a good man, worked hard, provided for us. We had a small homestead outside Flatridge. Nothing grand, but it was ours. Her voice was steady, controlled. When he died, I thought I could manage. I'd helped him run the place for years. But the debt came due. What debt? Samuel borrowed money from a man named Roscoe Vint to buy seed and equipment 2 years back. A bad winter killed most of the crop. Samuel planned to repay him the next season, but then he got sick. Fever took him in 3 days. Lydia's jaw tightened. Vint didn't care. He wanted his money. When I couldn't pay, he said I could work it off. Elias's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in his gut. Work it off how? Lydia met his eyes. You know how. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of things unsaid and understood. I refused, Lydia continued. Told him I'd sell the homestead, give him every cent. He said the homestead wasn't worth half what Samuel owed. Said I had something better to offer. She paused, her voice dropping. That's when I knew we had to leave. So you ran? We ran, Lydia confirmed, middle of the night. Took what we could carry and headed for the mountains. I thought if we could reach the high country, wait out the winter, maybe Vint would lose interest. Maybe we could start over somewhere else. And he sent men after you. It wasn't a question. Lydia nodded. 2 of them. Tracked us for days. We lost them in a canyon, but they're still out there. I know they are. Her hands trembled slightly. I didn't know where else to go. The storm was getting worse, the children were freezing, and then I remembered the stories about you. About the cabin in the high timber. Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her. You gambled that a man who lives alone on a mountain would help a stranger. I gambled that a man who chooses solitude understands what it means to want something different than what the world offers, Lydia said quietly. I was right. He couldn't argue with that. How much does Vint claim you owe? $300. Elias let out a slow breath. It was a fortune to most people. To a widow with 2 children, it might as well have been the moon. And the men tracking you, you think they'll give up because of weather? No, Lydia said, but I think the storm bought us time. Elias rose and moved to the window again. Out there in the white fury, men might be freezing to death, or they might be holed up somewhere close, waiting. He'd learned long ago that desperation made people stupid and dangerous in equal measure. You can't stay here forever, he said. I know. And you can't go back down to Flat Ridge. I know that too. He turned to face her. So what's your plan? Lydia's composure finally cracked, just a little. Her voice came out raw. I don't have one. I just needed to keep them alive one more day, and then one more after that. That's all I've been doing for months, surviving one more day. Behind her, a small sound made them both turn. Emily stood in the doorway, her bundle clutched to her chest, her eyes red from sleep. Mama? Lydia was on her feet in an instant, crossing to her daughter and kneeling down. I'm here, sweetheart. You're all right. I'm hungry. I know. Let's get you something to eat. Noah appeared behind his sister, fully dressed, his face carefully blank. He looked at Elias, then at his mother, reading the room with the instincts of a boy who'd learned to watch for danger. "We staying?" he asked. "For now," Lydia said, "if Mr. Crow allows it." Noah's gaze fixed on Elias, waiting. Elias had spent 15 years avoiding exactly this. People, complications, the mess that came with letting anyone into the carefully ordered life he'd built. He'd come to this mountain to escape the weight of other people's needs, other people's problems, other people's wars. But the boy standing in front of him wasn't asking for charity. He was asking for a chance. And the woman who'd stumbled to his door through a killing storm hadn't come to take anything from him. She'd come because she had nowhere else to go. "You can stay," Elias said, "until the storm breaks." Relief flooded Lydia's face, but Noah just nodded once, accepting the answer without gratitude or expectation. Smart kid. The day passed in the strange rhythm of forced proximity. Elias wasn't used to voices in his cabin, to the sound of small feet on the floorboards, to questions and needs and the constant hum of human presence. Emily asked about everything: why he had so many furs, where the water came from, what the jars on the shelves held, if he'd ever seen a bear. "Lots of bears," Elias said, surprising himself by answering. "Mostly in summer. They don't bother me." "Why not?" "Because I don't bother them." She seemed to accept this as perfectly logical and moved on to the next question. Noah stayed quieter, watching everything with sharp, careful eyes. He helped without being asked, carried wood from the pile outside, refilled the water barrel from the pump, swept the floor with a makeshift broom. He moved like someone used to work, used to pulling his weight. Lydia cooked supper, beans and cornbread, simple and filling. They ate together at the table, and for the first time in 15 years, Elias shared a meal with other people. It felt strange, uncomfortable, and somehow not entirely unwelcome. After supper, Emily pulled her bundle into her lap and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a cloth doll, worn and faded, with button eyes and yellow yarn hair. "This is Annabelle," she announced to Elias. "She's very brave." "I can see that," Elias said. "She came all the way up the mountain with us." "That is brave." Emily nodded seriously, then rewrapped the doll and held it close. As night fell and the storm continued its assault, Lydia put the children to bed again. Elias banked the fire and prepared his spot on the floor, but before he could settle in, Lydia spoke. "Mr. Crow?" He looked up. "Why did you let us in?" It was a fair question. He'd asked himself the same thing a dozen times since last night. "Didn't have much choice," he said finally. "You'd have died out there. You could have turned us away, sent us back down. To what? Men hunting you? A town that won't protect you?" Elias shook his head. "That's not a choice. That's just a slower kind of dying." Lydia studied him in the firelight, and he had the uncomfortable sense that she was seeing more than he wanted to show. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elias didn't respond. He lay down, pulled the blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easy. He listened to the wind, to the fire, to the soft sounds of breathing from the bed, and he wondered what he'd gotten himself into, and whether the storm outside was the only danger headed his way. The second day, the snow fell heavier. Elias went out twice to check the woodpile and clear snow from the door. Each time, the cold hit like a fist, and visibility dropped to nothing beyond 10 feet. Anyone caught out in this would be dead in an hour. Inside, the cabin felt smaller. Lydia worked quietly, mending clothes with a needle and thread she'd found in her pack. Emily played with her doll, creating elaborate stories in whispers. Noah sat by the window, staring out at the white void. "See something?" Elias asked, joining him. "No," Noah said. "Just watching." "For what?" The boy's jaw tightened. "Anything." Elias understood. The boy was keeping guard, the same way Elias had kept guard his entire life. It was instinct born from necessity. "They won't come in this," Elias said. "Storm's too thick." "They came before," Noah said, "when we thought we were safe." Elias didn't argue. The boy had learned the hard way that safety was temporary and threat was patient. "You know how to handle a rifle?" Elias asked. Noah's head whipped around, surprise breaking through his careful mask. "Some. My pa taught me before he died. Good. Tomorrow, if the storm lets up, I'll show you how to load mine, just in case. Noah nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, Lydia sat across from Elias at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of sage tea. "You're teaching my son to shoot," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Teaching him to protect himself," Elias corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah. One's about fear, the other's about readiness." Lydia looked toward the bed where Noah slept, his face finally soft with rest. "He's had to grow up too fast. Mountain does that to people." "It's not just the mountain," she paused. "After Samuel died, Noah tried to be the man of the house. 10 years old, and he thought he had to carry everything." "He's strong," Elias said. "He shouldn't have to be." "No," Elias agreed, "but he is. And that strength will keep him alive." Lydia met his eyes. "That's what you tell yourself, isn't it? That strength is enough. That if you're hard enough, tough enough, alone enough, nothing can touch you." Elias felt the words land like an accusation, even though her tone held no judgment. "It's worked so far," he said. "Has it?" Lydia asked softly. "Or have you just convinced yourself that alone is the same as safe?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. After a moment, Lydia rose and moved toward the bed. "Good night, Mr. Crow." "Elias," he said. She paused, looked back. "Just Elias." A small smile touched her lips. "Good night, Elias." He sat alone by the fire long after she'd fallen asleep, her words circling in his mind like crows around carrion. The third day, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died down, and the snow fell softer, almost gentle. Elias went out to assess the damage and found drifts piled 6 feet high against the cabin's north wall. The trail down the mountain had vanished completely. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, Noah was waiting. "You promised," the boy said. Elias nodded. "I did." He took down the rifle and showed Noah how to check the chamber, load the rounds, sight down the barrel. The boy's hands were steady, his attention absolute. He learned fast, asked good questions, didn't waste time. "Your pa taught you well," Elias said. "He taught me to hunt rabbits," Noah said. "Not men." "Same principle. You aim for center mass, breathe steady, squeeze slow." "What if I miss?" "You won't. Not if you do it right." Noah held the unloaded rifle, feeling its weight, its balance. "You ever killed a man?" Elias paused. It was a direct question, deserving of a direct answer. "Yes." "Did you have to?" "Yes." Noah nodded, accepting this without further question. He handed the rifle back. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not lying." Elias felt something shift in his chest, recognition, maybe. Or respect. This boy understood that truth, even when it was ugly, mattered more than comfort. That afternoon, as pale sunlight finally broke through the clouds, Elias stood at the window and saw movement in the tree line. 2 riders. They were distant, maybe a quarter-mile down the slope, picking their way through the snow. Even from here, Elias could tell they were searching, heads turning, eyes scanning. "Lydia," he said quietly. She came to his side, looked where he pointed, and went pale. "It's them," she whispered. Elias watched the riders for another moment. They hadn't spotted the cabin yet, hidden as it was among the dense timber, but they would. It was only a matter of time. "Get the children away from the windows," Elias said, "and stay quiet." Lydia moved quickly, gathering Noah and Emily and ushering them to the back corner of the cabin. Noah started to protest, but one look at his mother's face silenced him. Elias took down the rifle, loaded it, and positioned himself where he could see out without being seen. He tracked the riders as they moved through the trees, searching, methodical. One of them stopped, pointed. They'd seen the smoke from the chimney. Elias's jaw tightened. He could let them come, try to talk, maybe convince them to leave. But men who tracked a woman and children through a blizzard weren't the talking kind. The riders started up the slope toward the cabin. Elias glanced back at Lydia. She held both children close, her face set with the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly what was at stake. "Whatever happens," Elias said, "you stay inside. Understand?" Elias, understand? She nodded. He turned back to the window, rifle ready, and waited for the men to come. The riders came slowly, their horses laboring through snow that reached past their knees. Elias counted the seconds between their movements, calculating distance, trajectory, time. 2 men, both armed. He could see rifle stocks jutting from saddle scabbards. They rode with the casual confidence of predators who'd tracked wounded prey to its den. 50 yards out, they stopped. The taller one dismounted, handed his reins to his companion, and started forward on foot. He was broad-shouldered, wore a thick coat dark with melted snow, and moved with the deliberate care of someone who knew the mountains could kill you as easily as a bullet. When he got within 30 yards of the cabin, he cupped his hands around his mouth. "Mrs. Hale, we know you're in there." Behind Elias, Emily whimpered. Lydia's hand covered her daughter's mouth, gentle but firm. "Mr. Vint sent us to bring you home. He's willing to forgive the debt if you come back peaceful." Elias didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. The man waited, then tried again. "We don't want trouble. Just come out and talk." Silence answered him. The rider turned back toward his companion, gestured. They spoke in voices too low to carry. Then the mounted man pulled his rifle free, and the first man drew a pistol from beneath his coat. Elias raised his own rifle, sighted carefully, and fired. The shot cracked across the clearing like thunder. Snow exploded 3 feet in front of the lead man's boots. He stumbled backward, nearly fell, then scrambled for cover behind a thick pine. "That's close enough," Elias called out, his voice carrying across the frozen distance. "Turn around and ride out while you still can." A pause. Then the man's voice came back, harder now. "This ain't your fight, friend. We got business with the woman." "She's under my roof," Elias said. "That makes it my business." "You protecting a debtor and a thief?" "I'm protecting a woman and 2 children from men who tracked them through a killing storm. Don't much care what you call it." Another pause. Elias could see them conferring, weighing options. The mathematics of violence, 2 against 1, but one held high ground and cover. "We'll be back," the man finally shouted. "And we'll bring more men." "You do that," Elias called back. "Bring an army if it makes you feel better. Result will be the same." The 2 men retreated to their horses, mounted up, and disappeared back into the timber. Elias stayed at the window, rifle ready, for another 10 minutes. When he was satisfied they'd truly gone, he lowered the weapon and turned to find 3 pairs of eyes fixed on him. Noah looked almost impressed. Emily clung to her mother, face buried in Lydia's skirt. And Lydia herself stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "Just like he said." "I know. And they'll bring others." "Probably." "Then we should leave. Tonight. Before—" "Leave where?" Elias interrupted. "Trail's buried under 6 feet of snow. Storm might have eased, but another's coming. I can smell it. You won't make it a mile with the children." "Then what do we do?" Elias set the rifle down and moved to the stove, needing something to occupy his hands. "We wait. We prepare. And when they come back, we make them regret it." "You're talking about fighting." "I'm talking about standing ground." Lydia crossed the cabin, leaving the children in the corner. When she spoke, her voice was low, urgent. "I didn't come here to turn you into a target. This is my problem, my debt, my—" "Your husband borrowed money and died before he could pay it back," Elias said, meeting her eyes. "That's not a debt. That's grief. And no amount of money or threats makes it right for men to hunt you and your children like animals. That's not how the law sees it. The law's 12 miles away and buried in snow. Up here, there's only what's right and what a man can live with." He paused. "I've lived alone a long time, Lydia. Made peace with solitude. But I can't make peace with turning away a woman and 2 kids because I'm too scared or too selfish to help." Something shifted in her expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. "You're a better man than you pretend to be." "Don't count on it." But she was already turning away, moving back to comfort Emily, and Elias was left standing by the stove with the uncomfortable weight of his own words settling over him like snow. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Elias checked his ammunition, enough for a sustained fight if it came to that. He moved supplies away from the windows, reinforced the door with an iron bar he'd forged years ago, and positioned furniture to create cover. Noah watched everything, absorbing the details with the intensity of a student before an exam. "Can I help?" the boy asked. "You can keep watch at that window," Elias said, pointing to the eastern wall. "Anyone comes from that direction, you tell me." Noah took up his post without complaint, and Elias felt a flicker of something he didn't want to examine too closely. Pride, maybe, or the terrible recognition that this boy deserved better than a war. That evening, Lydia made stew from the last of the venison. They ate in near silence, the weight of what might be coming pressing down on all of them. Emily picked at her food, her usual curiosity dampened by fear she didn't fully understand but could feel in the adults around her. "Tell me a story," she said suddenly, looking at Elias. "Emily," Lydia said gently, "Mr. Crow doesn't—" "Actually," Elias interrupted, surprising himself again. "I know one." Three faces turned toward him expectantly. "When I first came to this mountain," he began, "there was a winter that lasted 7 months. Snow fell every day from October through April. Game disappeared. Wood got scarce. I thought for sure I wouldn't make it." He paused, remembering the desperate hunger, the cold that sank into bones, and refused to leave. "But there was a raven that started coming around. Big black bird with eyes smart as any person's. Every morning it would land on that windowsill and make noise until I gave it scraps." "Did you?" Emily asked. "Didn't want to at first. Food was too precious. But the bird kept coming, kept asking, and eventually I figured if it was surviving this winter, maybe I could learn something from it." Elias leaned back in his chair. "So I started watching where it went, what it ate. Led me to a whole grove of pine nuts I hadn't known was there. Enough to last me through the worst of it." "What happened to the raven?" Noah asked. "Still comes around sometimes. Every few years I'll see a big black bird land on that sill, and I wonder if it's the same one, or maybe one of its children." "What's the moral?" Lydia asked, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Moral?" Elias frowned. "Ain't a moral, just something that happened." "Every story has a moral." "Then you tell me what it is." Lydia considered. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and sometimes surviving means accepting that help, even when you think you should do it alone." Elias met her eyes and said nothing, but he didn't disagree. After the children were in bed, Lydia joined him by the fire. Outside, wind had picked up again, the promised second storm moving in. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 15 years, give or take." "That's a long time to be alone." "It's what I wanted." "Why?" Elias poked at the fire, watching sparks rise and disappear into darkness. "Got tired of people, their noise, their expectations, their wars. Figured the mountain wouldn't ask me for anything I wasn't willing to give." "And has it worked? Has the mountain left you alone?" He thought about that, about the avalanche that nearly buried the cabin in year 3, the broken leg in year 7 that almost killed him, the loneliness that crept in during the longest nights and made him question everything. "Mostly," he said, "but not entirely." "No," he admitted. "Not entirely." Lydia pulled her knees to her chest, staring into the flames. "I thought having a family, a home, a normal life would be enough. That if I could just get those things and hold on to them, I'd be safe, happy." Her voice went soft. "Samuel was a good husband, a good father, and losing him showed me how fragile all of it really was, how quickly everything you build can disappear." "So you ran." "I fought first," she corrected. "Tried to negotiate with Vint, tried to sell everything, tried to find honest work that would let me keep the children fed and safe." Her jaw tightened. "But men like Vint don't want solutions. They want power. And when you're a woman alone with children, they think you're easy prey." "They thought wrong." "Did they?" "I'm hiding in a stranger's cabin while armed men hunt me through the snow. Doesn't feel like strength." "Strength isn't never being afraid," Elias said. "It's being afraid and moving anyway. You got your kids out. You kept them alive through 3 days in a blizzard. You found help. That's not weakness." Lydia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You keep saying these things like you believe them." "I do." "Then why don't you believe them about yourself?" The question landed like a slap. Elias opened his mouth, closed it again. You think living alone makes you strong, Lydia continued, but maybe it just makes you safe. And safe isn't the same as alive. Before he could respond, Noah's voice cut through the cabin. Someone's coming. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He moved to the window where Noah stood pointing into the darkness. At first, Elias saw nothing. Then movement. A single figure on foot, struggling through deep snow, waving an arm. Don't shoot, a voice called out, rough with cold and desperation. Please, I need help. Elias studied the approaching figure. Man, maybe 60, thin and bent, no visible weapons. He was maybe 40 yards out and barely staying upright. Could be a trick, Noah said quietly. Smart boy. But Elias had spent enough years reading mountains and men to know desperation when he saw it. This wasn't a fighter, this was someone dying. Stay back, Elias told the others. He cracked the door open, rifle raised. That's far enough. State your business. The man stopped, swaying. Name's Walter Kemp. I'm the teacher from Flat Ridge. Got caught in the storm coming back from the McAllister Ranch. Been lost 2 days. Please, I can't feel my feet. Elias recognized the name, the town's school teacher, a harmless old man who taught reading and arithmetic to farm children. But recognition didn't mean trust. You alone? Yes. Please, I just need somewhere warm, just for tonight. Elias made his decision. Come ahead. Slow. Hands where I can see them. The old man stumbled forward, nearly fell, caught himself. When he reached the door, Elias could see his lips were blue, his face windburned almost black. This wasn't deception. This was a man minutes from freezing to death. Get him inside, Lydia said, already moving to help. Together they half-carried Walter to the fire. His clothes were frozen stiff, his hands locked into claws. Lydia stripped off his coat, while Elias pulled off boots to reveal feet white with frostbite. Water, Elias ordered. Lukewarm, not hot. We heat him too fast, he'll go into shock. They worked in practiced coordination. Lydia bringing water, Elias massaging circulation back into frozen limbs, Noah fetching dry clothes and blankets. Emily watched with wide eyes, clutching her doll. The children, Walter gasped when he could finally speak. Hail children. Are they... Lydia? We're here, Walter, Lydia said gently. We're safe. Relief flooded the old man's face. Thank God. Whole town's been looking. Vint said you stole from him, but I told them. Told them you wouldn't. I didn't steal anything, Lydia said firmly. Samuel's debt died with Samuel. Vint just won't accept that. He's got the sheriff convinced otherwise, posted a bounty, $50 for information leading to your return. Walter coughed, painful and wet. Men came through yesterday, said they'd tracked you into high country, said they'd bring you back one way or another. Those men were here earlier, Elias said. Sent them running. Walter's eyes widened. You stood against Vint's men? I stood against men threatening a woman and children under my roof. You don't understand. Vint owns half the town. The sheriff, the judge, they're all in his pocket. If he wants Mrs. Hale brought back, the law won't help her. The law's not here, Elias said flatly. I am. Walter looked between Elias and Lydia, comprehension dawning. You're the mountain man, Crow. I've heard the stories. Stories are mostly lies. Maybe so, but the ones about you said you were a Union sharpshooter during the war, said you could hit a man at 300 yards. Elias's expression went carefully blank. Lydia was watching him now too, questions in her eyes. War's been over a long time, Elias said. But the skills remain, Walter said. Vint's men won't expect that. They think they're hunting a helpless widow. They don't know she's found a protector. I'm not a protector. I'm just a man who won't turn away people freezing on my doorstep. But even as he said it, Elias knew it was a lie. He'd made a choice when he fired that warning shot, made another when he let Lydia and the children stay. And now, listening to Walter describe the forces arrayed against them, he was making a third choice, to see this through, whatever that meant. Walter fell asleep by the fire, exhausted and half frozen. Lydia covered him with blankets and checked his feet for further damage. The children had long since gone to bed, Noah taking watch shifts even in sleep, jerking awake at every sound. "You were a soldier," Lydia said when she and Elias were alone again. "A long time ago. Is that why you came here? To get away from the war?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. "I came here to get away from what the war made me." "And what was that?" "Good at killing." The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrible. "I don't believe that's all you were," Lydia said finally. "Believe what you want." "I believe you're a man who could have turned us away but didn't. Who could have let Walter freeze but didn't. Who keeps saying he wants to be alone but can't seem to stop helping people." She paused. "That doesn't sound like someone who's just good at killing." "You don't know me." "No," Lydia agreed, "but I'm learning." The next morning brought clear skies and brutal cold. The second storm had passed through quickly, leaving another foot of snow but sparing them the sustained assault of the first. Walter woke feverish, his frostbite worse than Elias had hoped. They'd likely have to take some toes if infection set in. "We need to get him to a doctor," Lydia said. "Nearest doctor's in Flat Ridge," Elias pointed out. "Same place Vint and his men are waiting. Then we're trapped." "No, we're fortified. There's a difference." But Lydia was right about Walter. The old man needed proper medical care, and soon, which meant someone had to go down the mountain. "I'll go," Noah said. He'd been listening from his post by the window. "I'm small, fast. I can get to town, bring back the doctor." "Absolutely not," Lydia said. "Ma, I can do it. I know the trail." "The trail's gone, buried under snow, and even if you found it, Vint's men are out there." "So what do we do? Let Mr. Kemp die?" The question silenced them all. Walter, sweating and shaking by the fire, raised a weak hand. Don't risk the boy. I'm an old man, had my years." "Nobody's dying," Elias said. He moved to the corner where he kept his winter gear, snowshoes, heavy furs, a pack. "I'll go, move fast, bring the doctor back. 2 days, maybe 3. "You can't leave us here," Lydia protested. "If those men come back, then you bar the door, and you shoot anyone who tries to come through it." He pulled the second rifle down from the wall, an older model, but reliable. "Noah knows how to load. You know how to aim. Between the two of you, you can hold this cabin." "Elias, it's the only way." He met her eyes, saw the fear there and something else, trust she wasn't sure she should give. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen." Lydia's jaw tightened. Then slowly she nodded. Elias spent the next hour preparing. He packed light, jerky, coffee, ammunition, a bedroll, showed Lydia and Noah how to reinforce the door, where to position themselves for best defensive advantage, how to make the cabin into a fortress if needed. "Don't open this door for anyone but me or a man wearing a doctor's bag," he said. "And if someone claims to be me, make them prove it. Ask something only I would know." "Like what?" Lydia asked. Elias thought. "Like the raven. Ask about the raven and the pine nuts." She nodded, committing it to memory. Emily, understanding that Elias was leaving, grabbed his hand. "You'll come back." He looked down at the small girl with her serious eyes and her tattered doll. "I will." "A promise?" Elias knelt to her level. "I promise. Annabelle will wait for you too. You tell Annabelle I'm counting on her to be brave while I'm gone." Emily nodded solemnly. Elias rose, shouldered his pack, and opened the door. Cold rushed in, sharp and clean. He looked back once, at Lydia standing fierce and frightened by the fire, at Noah already taking position with the rifle, at Emily clutching her doll, at Walter unconscious and dying, at the family he'd somehow inherited through nothing more than an act of basic decency. 2 days, he said. 3 at most. Then he stepped into the snow and closed the door behind him. The mountain greeted him with silence and cold. Elias strapped on the snowshoes and started down the buried trail, each step punching through the crust, each breath burning his lungs. He moved fast, knowing that somewhere below, men were waiting. But he'd spent 15 years learning this mountain's secrets. They'd be expecting someone desperate, careless, easy to track. They'd be wrong. By the time the sun reached its peak, Elias was 3 miles down, moving through timber so thick it blocked most of the sky. He stopped once to rest, checking his back trail. No pursuit. Not yet. He thought about Lydia's words, about strength and safety, about being alone versus being alive. Thought about the choice he'd made, not just to help, but to leave his sanctuary and descend back into the world of men and their violence. 15 years he'd been running from what the war made him. Now he was running toward it. And somehow, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that felt right. The descent took Elias through country he knew like the lines on his own hands. Steep ravines where snow gathered in treacherous drifts, narrow passages between rock faces that funneled wind into cutting blades, stands of aspen that creaked and swayed like old men telling secrets. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that wasted motion meant death, each step deliberate, each pause strategic. By late afternoon, he'd covered 7 miles and dropped 2,000 feet in elevation. The air had thickened, grown marginally warmer, though cold still bit through his furs whenever he stopped moving. He found a spot beneath an overhang of granite, sheltered from wind, and allowed himself 10 minutes to rest and eat. The jerky was tough as leather, but it filled his stomach and gave him something to focus on besides the silence. He was chewing the last piece when he heard voices. Elias went perfectly still, listening. 2 men, maybe 3, somewhere below and to the east. Their words carried up through the timber, distorted by distance and wind but unmistakably human. He eased forward, staying low, and spotted them through a gap in the trees. 3 riders picking their way along what used to be the trail. They dismounted to lead their horses through a particularly deep section, moving slow and frustrated. Even from 100 yards up, Elias could read their body language. Cold, tired, angry. These were the same men from before, or others cut from the same cloth. One of them stopped, pointed up the mountain in the general direction of Elias's cabin. The others gathered around, conferring. Then they remounted and continued along the trail, heading not up but parallel to the slope, searching, looking for tracks, for signs of passage. Elias waited until they disappeared around a bend, then moved in the opposite direction, taking a longer route that would keep him off the main trail entirely. It added distance and time, but getting caught in the open by 3 armed men wasn't an option he could afford. He pushed through until full dark forced him to stop, found a hollow beneath a massive fallen pine, cleared space in the snow, and made a cold camp. No fire, just his bedroll and furs wrapped tight against the night. Above him, stars burned cold and indifferent. He thought about the cabin, about Lydia and the children holding the line while he was gone. Thought about Walter fighting off fever and frostbite. Thought about how easily everything could fall apart. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sounds of the mountain settling around him and the occasional distant howl of wolves. He woke before dawn, stiff and aching, and pushed on. The second day brought him into lower country where the snow thinned and the trail occasionally revealed itself in patches. He spotted horse tracks, recent ones, maybe 6 hours old, and adjusted his route to avoid them. Twice more he heard voices and had to detour around search parties. Vint had clearly sent out multiple groups, creating a net across the lower mountain. They were being systematic about it, which meant they were being funded well enough to keep men out in brutal conditions. That level of commitment told Elias everything he needed to know about how far Vint would go to reclaim what he saw as his property. By midday, Elias could see Flat Ridge in the valley below. A collection of weathered buildings sprawled along a frozen creek, smoke rising from chimneys, the whole settlement looking small and fragile against the massive landscape surrounding it. He'd been to town exactly once a year for the past 15 years, always in summer, always just long enough to trade furs for supplies and leave before anyone tried to make conversation. Now he was walking into it in the dead of winter with a target on his back. He circled wide, approaching from the north where a stand of cottonwoods offered cover almost to the edge of town. The streets were mostly empty, just a few figures hurrying between buildings against the cold. Elias watched for 10 minutes, learning the rhythm, then walked in like he belonged. The doctor's office sat on the east end of town, a neat frame building with a painted sign that read, Dr. Harrison Webb, Physician and Surgeon. Elias climbed the steps and tried the door, locked. He knocked, waited, knocked again harder. A voice from inside irritated. "We're closed. Come back tomorrow." "Got a man dying of frostbite." Elias called through the door. He needs help now. A pause. Then footsteps, and the door cracked open to reveal a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and skeptical eyes. Who are you? Elias Crow. Walter Kemp's at my cabin with blackened toes and fever. You're coming with me. Recognition flickered across the doctor's face. Walter? Where? High country, day and a half on foot, maybe 2 with gear. I can't just leave. I have patients. You've got one dying on a mountain, Elias interrupted. That makes him priority. Dr. Webb hesitated, then nodded. Give me 20 minutes to gather supplies. You've got 10. And doctor, don't mention this to anyone, understand? Webb's expression sharpened. This is about the Hale woman, isn't it? About Vince Bounty? This is about an old man who needs medical attention. Nothing else. Vint has men watching the roads. If they see me leaving, they won't. We're not taking roads. Webb studied Elias for a long moment, then disappeared back inside. Elias waited on the porch, watching the street. A woman passed carrying a basket, didn't look up. A man led a mule toward the livery, paying no attention. Normal life continuing while he stood there planning how to smuggle a doctor out of town. Webb emerged exactly 9 minutes later, wearing a heavy coat and carrying a leather medical bag and a pack stuffed with supplies. I'm trusting you know what you're doing. I do. They moved quickly through the cottonwoods, heading north before circling back east toward the mountain. Elias set a brutal pace, knowing that every minute in the valley increased their chances of being spotted. Webb kept up without complaint, his breath coming hard but steady. They'd made it maybe 2 miles when Elias heard the horses. He grabbed Webb and pulled him into a thick stand of scrub oak, both of them dropping flat behind a fallen log. 3 riders came up the trail from town, moving at a trot, their eyes scanning the snow for tracks. That's Vince Foreman, Webb whispered. The one on the left. Name's Cobb. Meanest son of a bitch in the territory. Elias watched the riders pass within 30 yards, close enough to see the rifle each man carried and the hard set of their faces. They were hunting, and they were serious about it. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Elias and Webb continued, moving faster now, urgency pushing them on. They hit the steeper slopes as afternoon light began to fail, and Elias had to slow down to keep Webb from breaking something in the treacherous terrain. How much farther? Webb asked, his voice tight with exhaustion. 6 miles, maybe 7. That's 2 hours in good conditions. These aren't good conditions. Then we move faster. They pushed through gathering darkness, Webb stumbling occasionally but refusing to quit. Elias found himself grudgingly impressed. The doctor was soft from town living, but he had backbone. Full dark caught them still 3 miles from the cabin. Elias risked a small fire in a sheltered spot, just enough for Webb to warm his hands and drink some hot coffee. They sat in silence, both too tired for conversation. Why are you doing this? Webb asked finally. Walter's not family. The Hales aren't your responsibility. No, Elias agreed. They're not. But you're risking your life for them anyway. Elias poured more coffee, watching steam rise into cold air. Man's got to stand for something. Might as well be worth standing for. That's not much of an answer. It's the only one I've got. Webb nodded slowly. Fair enough. They made the final 3 miles in darkness, Elias navigating by memory and feel. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, a single light burning in the window, relief hit him harder than he expected. He approached carefully, watching for signs of disturbance. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed except for his own tracks from 2 days ago. No sign of visitors, no indication of attack. Wait here, Elias told Webb. He moved to the door, knocked 3 times. Lydia, it's Elias. Silence. Then Lydia's voice, steady but cautious. Tell me about the raven. Bird came during a 7-month winter. Led me to pine nuts, saved my life. The bar scraped, the door opened, and Lydia stood there with the rifle, Noah behind her with the other one. When she saw Elias, something broke in her expression, relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. You came back. Said I would. I know, but still. Elias gestured Webb forward. Brought the doctor. They got Webb inside and immediately to work on Walter. The old teacher was worse than when Elias had left, his fever higher, the blackened toes spreading up his foot. Webb examined him with quick, efficient movements, his expression growing grimmer. "I need to take the toes," he said. "Maybe part of the foot. If I don't, the infection will kill him." "Do it," Walter rasped from the floor. Just make it quick." What followed was brutal and necessary. Webb worked by firelight while Lydia held Walter's hand and Noah kept Emily in the corner, turned away from the surgery. Elias provided what help he could, holding Walter down when the pain made him thrash, heating instruments in the fire, preparing bandages from torn cloth. Walter screamed once, a sound that cut through the cabin like a knife, then passed out. Webb kept working, his hands steady despite the conditions. By the time he finished, 3 toes and part of Walter's left foot lay wrapped in cloth, and the old teacher's stump was bandaged and treated with carbolic acid. "He'll live," Webb said, washing his hands in a basin, "but he won't be walking far any time soon." "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. Webb nodded, then looked at her directly. "You're the woman Vince's hunting." It wasn't a question. Lydia met his gaze without flinching. "I am." "He's saying you stole from him." "He's lying. My husband owed him money. My husband died. The debt died with him." "That's not how Vince sees it. He's got the law on his side, at least the version of law that exists in Flat Ridge." "Then the law's wrong." Webb smiled, tired and sad. "Usually is, but that doesn't stop it from being enforced." He turned to Elias. "You know what you've done, bringing me here? If Vint finds out I helped her, I'm finished in that town." "You could have said no." "Could I?" Webb looked at Walter's unconscious form. "When you knocked on my door saying a man was dying, did I really have a choice?" "Everyone's got a choice." "Maybe, but some choices are easier to live with than others." Webb started repacking his medical bag. "I'll stay tonight, make sure Walter's stable. But come morning, I need to get back before I'm missed." They settled into an uneasy routine. Webb monitored Walter through the night, checking his fever, adjusting bandages. Lydia made food and coffee, keeping everyone fed and functional. Noah maintained his vigil at the window, watching for threats that never came. Emily slept fitfully, curled around her doll, and Elias sat by the door, rifle across his knees, thinking about the net closing around them. Near midnight, Lydia brought him coffee and sat beside him. "You didn't have to come back," she said quietly. "Yes, I did." "Why?" "You could have just sent the doctor up, stayed in town, avoided all this." "Could have," Elias agreed. "Didn't want to." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A hermit, someone so bitter and broken that isolation was the only option left." She paused. "Instead, I found someone who can't seem to help helping, even when it costs him." "Don't make me into something I'm not." "I'm not. I'm just seeing what's actually there." Before Elias could respond, Webb called out softly, "He's waking." They gathered around Walter as the old teacher's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused at first, then memory returned, and with it, pain. "Easy," Webb said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're through the worst of it." "My foot." "Gone. 3 toes and part of the foot." "But you're alive." Walter nodded weakly. "Lydia? The children?" "We're safe," Lydia said, kneeling beside him. "Thanks to you and Mr. Crow." "And the doctor," Walter added. "Harrison, you risked a lot coming here." "We all did," Webb said. "Question now is what happens next." The question hung in the air like smoke. Elias spoke first. "Storm bought us time, but it won't last forever. Eventually the snow will melt enough for Vince's men to get up here in force. When that happens, we won't be able to hold them off." "So we run," Noah said from his post. "To where?" Lydia asked. "We barely survived getting here, and now we have Walter who can't walk." "There might be another option," Webb said slowly. All eyes turned to him. "The territorial marshal comes through Flat Ridge twice a year. He's due next week. If you could get to him, file a formal complaint, maybe—" "Maybe what?" Elias interrupted. "Vint owns the local law. Yes, a complaint won't change that. The marshal's not local. He answers to the territorial government, not to men like Vint. And you think he'd listen to a widow accused of theft? I think he'd listen to evidence, to testimony, to the truth, if it's presented right. Lydia shook her head. That's a big risk. What if the marshal doesn't believe me? What if Vint gets to him first? What if he does believe you? Webb countered. What if this is your chance to actually fix this instead of just running? Silence fell over the cabin. Outside, wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Inside, firelight cast shadows that danced across worried faces. Even if we wanted to try, Lydia said, how would we get to the marshal? Vint's men are everywhere. Not everywhere, Elias said. They're concentrated on the trails, watching the obvious routes, but there are other ways down. Through the high passes? Webb looked skeptical. This time of year? That's suicide. This time of year, it's unexpected, which makes it possible. Noah turned from the window. I'll go. I'm small, fast. I can make it. No, Lydia said sharply. Ma, I can. I said no. Then I'll go, Elias said. Every head swiveled toward him. I know the passes, know the country, and I can move alone faster than any of you. What about us? Emily asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. What if the bad men come while you're gone? It was the question none of the adults wanted to voice, but all of them were thinking. You stay here, Elias said, looking at Lydia. Keep the cabin locked, keep watch, and wait. If I can reach the marshal, get him to come back with me, this ends. If I can't... He didn't finish the sentence. If you can't, we're still trapped on a mountain with winter and armed men between us and safety, Lydia finished for him. Yes. She stood, paced to the window, stared out at darkness. When she turned back, her face was set with decision. Then we need a backup plan. Something we can do if talking to the marshal doesn't work. Like what? Webb asked. Like fighting, Noah said quietly. Noah, Lydia started. I'm not a child anymore, Ma. We all know what this is. We all know what might have to happen. The boy's words settled over them with the weight of stones. There won't be fighting if I can help it, Elias said. But the boy's not wrong. We should be ready for the possibility. Webb ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and stress etched into every line. This has gotten so much bigger than a debt and a widow. It was always bigger than that, Lydia said. It's about whether men like Vint get to decide who has value and who doesn't, whether being powerful means being right, whether people like me and my children deserve protection or just whatever scraps we can beg for. She looked around the cabin at each of them in turn. I didn't come to this mountain to start a war. I came to survive. But if surviving means standing up to Vint and his lies, then that's what I'll do. And if any of you want to walk away, I won't blame you. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when I opened my door, Elias said. And mine when I picked up my bag, Webb added. And mine when those men came looking for my ma, Noah said. Even Emily nodded, clutching Annabelle tight. Annabelle says she'll fight too. Despite everything, Lydia laughed, a short, sharp sound that was part disbelief and part something like hope. Then I guess we're all in this together. Guess so, Elias agreed. They spent the rest of the night planning. Webb would return to town at first light, act as if nothing had happened, and watch for the marshal's arrival. Elias would take the high pass route as soon as conditions allowed, moving fast and light to intercept the marshal before Vint could spin his version of events. Lydia, Noah, and Emily would hold the cabin, with Walter providing what counsel he could from his sickbed. It wasn't a perfect plan. Wasn't even a particularly good one, but it was what they had. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that made the mountain look deceptively peaceful. Webb prepared to leave, checking his bag one final time. If this goes wrong, he said to Elias, if Vint figures out I was here, then you head for the territorial capital and don't look back. Webb nodded. Watch yourself out there. The high passes are beautiful, but they don't forgive mistakes. Neither do I. Webb shook his hand, then turned to Lydia. Keep pressure on those bandages. Change them twice a day. If the fever comes back, there's laudanum in the bottle. 3 drops, no more. Thank you, Doctor. Harrison, after all this, I think we're past formalities. He left without ceremony, disappearing into the timber like a ghost. Elias watched him go, then turned to his own preparations. He'd need different gear for the high country, lighter pack, better furs, climbing rope for the steeper sections. "When will you leave?" Lydia asked. "Tomorrow. Need to rest after the last 2 days, and I want to make sure Walter's stable before I go." "And if the marshal doesn't come? Or doesn't believe you?" Elias met her eyes. "Then we find another way." "What other way?" "I don't know yet, but we'll find it." She searched his face, looking for reassurance or certainty, or maybe just honesty. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she nodded and moved away to check on Walter. The day passed in strange domesticity, cooking, cleaning, maintaining gear, tending the injured. Noah practiced with the rifle under Elias's instruction, learning to aim without flinching, to breathe steady, to squeeze rather than pull. Emily helped her mother with small tasks, chattering about Annabelle's adventures and asking questions about everything. And Walter, propped against the wall with blankets and furs, told stories about Flatridge, about the families he'd taught, about the town before men like Vint had sunk their claws in deep. "It used to be different," he said. "People looked out for each other, shared what they had. Now it's every man for himself, and the devil take whoever falls behind." "Not everyone," Lydia said. "You came looking for us. Harrison risked everything to help. Elias opened his door." "The exceptions that prove the rule," Walter said sadly. "But you're right. There's still good people, just not enough of them." That night, Elias made a final check of his gear and provisions. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake in the high country could mean death. He was testing the strength of his climbing rope when he felt Emily beside him. "Are you scared?" she asked. Elias considered lying, then decided she deserved better. "Yes." "But you're going anyway." "Yes." "Because it's the right thing?" "Because it's the only thing." Emily nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Annabelle says you're the bravest person she's ever met." "Annabelle's too generous." "No, she's not. She's very smart." Elias smiled despite himself. "Then tell Annabelle thank you." Emily leaned against his shoulder, small and warm and trusting. "Come back safe, okay?" "I will." "Promise?" "I promise." She hugged him quickly, fiercely, then ran back to her mother. Elias sat alone by the fire, feeling the weight of that promise like a physical thing. He'd made promises before, to fellow soldiers, to people he'd tried to save, to himself. Most of them he'd broken. The war had taught him that promises were just words, easily shattered by bullets and chance and the brutal mathematics of survival. But this one felt different. This one he intended to keep. Morning came with a sky so clear it hurt to look at, the kind of crystalline blue that promised brutal cold and unforgiving conditions. Elias woke before dawn, his body already anticipating the demands ahead. He moved quietly through the cabin, not wanting to wake the others, but found Lydia already up, stirring oatmeal at the stove. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong." "That's a long list." "I know." She poured him coffee, their fingers brushing briefly as she handed him the cup. "But the list of ways it could go right is pretty short, so I'm trying to focus on that instead." Elias drank, letting the heat spread through him. Outside, the world was still dark, stars fading as light gathered at the eastern horizon. "You'll be all right here. You know how to hold this place." "Against how many men?" "However many come." "That's not much of an answer." "It's an honest one." Lydia set down her spoon and faced him directly. "If you don't come back, what should I do? Wait here until spring? Try to run again?" "If I don't come back, it means the marshal didn't listen or didn't care. Either way, Vint wins and you need to disappear. Take the children, take Walter if he can travel, and head north. Canada's 3 weeks on foot if you know the way." "Do I know the way?" "No, but Walter does. He taught in the northern settlements before Flatridge. He'll get you there." Lydia absorbed this, her expression unreadable. "You've thought this through." "Had to. Can't leave without knowing you have options." "Even the bad ones, especially those." She moved to the window, watching dawn break over the mountains. "When Samuel died, I thought the worst thing that could happen already had. Thought nothing could hurt more than burying a good man and facing the world alone with 2 children. Her voice was quiet but steady. I was wrong. The worst thing is having people you care about put themselves in danger because you couldn't solve your own problems. This stopped being just your problem the moment Vint sent men to hunt you. Did it? Or did I just drag you into something that should have stayed my burden? Elias crossed to stand beside her. I've been alone on this mountain 15 years. Chose it, defended it, convinced myself it was enough. Then you knocked on my door half frozen and desperate, and I had a choice. Turn you away and keep my peace, or let you in and accept whatever came after. He paused. I let you in. That wasn't your burden forcing itself on me. That was my choice, made freely. Why? The question came out raw. Why choose the harder path? Because the easy path was killing me slow. I just didn't know it until I had something to compare it to. Before Lydia could respond, Noah emerged from the sleeping area, already dressed, moving toward his watch position with automatic discipline. He nodded to Elias, face serious, and older than 10 years should allow. Weather looks good for travel, the boy observed. It does. You'll make the high pass by nightfall if you push hard. Elias studied Noah, seeing the worry the boy worked hard to hide. You'll take care of things here. Yes, sir. Your ma's tougher than she looks, but she'll need you to be the man you've been trying to be. Noah's throat worked. I won't let anything happen to them. I know you won't. They held each other's gaze for a moment, an understanding passing between them that needed no words. Then Noah turned back to his window, rifle close at hand, and Elias finished his preparations. Walter woke as Elias was shouldering his pack. The old teacher looked better than he had, color returning to his face, fever down, eyes clearer. But the pain was there too, written in every careful movement. You're really doing this, Walter said, going after the marshal. Only chance we have. You could just take them north yourself. Leave me here. Avoid all this risk. Could, Elias agreed. But then Vint wins. Men like him always do when good people run. Walter's expression tightened with something like pride. You know, I taught school for 40 years, saw hundreds of children grow into adults, watched them become farmers, merchants, drifters, thieves. And the one thing I learned is that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway. Is there a point to this? The point is, you're a good man, Elias Crow, whether you believe it or not. Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just gripped Walter's shoulder briefly and moved to the door. Emily was suddenly there, Annabelle clutched tight, her small face creased with worry. You promised to come back. I did. Annabelle wants to make sure you remember. Elias knelt down to her level. Tell Annabelle I remember. And tell her I'm counting on her to keep everyone safe while I'm gone. Emily hugged him with the fierce desperation of a child who understood more than anyone wanted her to. Then she stepped back, nodding solemnly. Lydia walked him to the door. They stood there in the threshold, cold air rushing in, the moment stretching between them. 3 days, Elias said. 4 at most. If I'm not back by then, you'll be back. Lydia, you'll be back, she repeated, her voice firm. Because you promised Emily, and because you're the kind of man who keeps his word. So I'm not going to stand here and plan for what happens if you don't. I'm just going to wait for when you do. Elias wanted to argue, to make her understand the odds, the dangers, the very real possibility that he might not survive what was coming. But the look in her eyes stopped him. Not hope exactly, but something stronger. Faith, maybe, or just the stubborn refusal to accept any outcome except the one she'd decided on. All right, he said finally. I'll be back. I know. Then he stepped into the cold and began climbing. The route to the high pass was brutal, even in summer. Steep switchbacks, loose scree, sections where you had to pull yourself up using roots and rock holds. In winter, with snow covering everything, it became a test of will and skill. Elias moved carefully but steadily, his breath coming in white plumes, his muscles burning with effort. By mid-morning, he'd climbed above the tree line into a world of snow and stone and wind. The cabin was a distant memory below, invisible in the timber. Ahead, the pass cut through a wall of granite like a wound in the mountain's face. He rested briefly, eating jerky and checking his route. The pass itself was maybe 3 miles ahead, but those 3 miles would take hours of hard climbing. And once through, he'd have to descend the eastern slope, navigate unfamiliar country, and somehow find the marshal before Vince's version of events became accepted truth. Long odds. But he'd faced worse. The climb resumed, each step deliberate, each handhold tested. In places, the snow had drifted so deep he had to break trail, punching through crust that sometimes held his weight and sometimes didn't. His legs ached, his lungs burned, sweat froze on his skin despite the exertion, but he kept moving. The sun reached its peak and started falling toward the western horizon. Elias was maybe a mile from the pass when he heard the sound, distant but unmistakable. Gunfire. He froze, listening. 3 shots in quick succession, then silence, coming from behind and below, from the direction of his cabin. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, to help. But cold calculation held him in place. If he turned back now, the marshal would arrive with only Vince's lies to guide him. The cabin would fall eventually anyway, overwhelmed by superior numbers and supplies. The only way to save them was to keep going, to reach the marshal, to bring help that could actually change the outcome. But the silence after those shots was deafening. Elias closed his eyes, made himself breathe, made himself think. Lydia was smart. Noah was capable. They had weapons, cover, and the advantage of defensive position. 3 shots didn't mean defeat. Might just mean warning shots or hunters in the valley, or a dozen other explanations. But his hands were shaking when he started climbing again, and this time it wasn't from cold or exertion. He reached the pass as the sun touched the western peaks. The wind up here was savage, cutting through his furs like knives, driving snow into his face with enough force to blind. He pushed through, fighting for each step, until finally the ground leveled out and the worst of the wind eased. On the eastern side, the descent was if anything more treacherous than the climb. The slope fell away at an angle that made his stomach clench, snow-covered rock offering few handholds. He roped himself to a boulder and began the careful process of working his way down, testing each foothold, moving in inches rather than feet. Full darkness caught him halfway down, forcing him to stop on a narrow ledge barely wide enough to sit. He wedged himself into a crack in the rock, wrapped in furs, and tried not to think about the drop below or the cabin behind or the impossible nature of what he was attempting. Sleep came in fits, dream-haunted and restless. He saw Lydia standing at the door as men approached, saw Noah aiming the rifle with steady hands, saw Emily clutching her doll while the world burned around her. Woke gasping into darkness, unsure what was dream and what was memory and what was premonition. Dawn found him stiff and aching, but alive. He continued the descent, reaching the bottom as full light spread across the valley below. From here, he could see the main road that connected Flat Ridge to the eastern settlements, a ribbon of snow-covered ground winding through the valley. And on that road, perhaps 2 miles distant, he spotted riders. Elias scrambled down the remaining slope, half sliding through snow and rock, and hit the valley floor running. His legs protested, exhaustion making him clumsy, but he forced himself on. The riders were moving away from him, heading east, and if he didn't reach them soon, they'd be gone. He ran until his lungs felt like fire, until his vision tunneled, until he thought his legs might simply stop working. Then he cupped his hands and shouted with everything he had left, "Marshal! Marshal Webb!" The rider stopped, turned. 5 men on horseback, watching this wild figure stumble toward them out of the wilderness. Elias closed the distance, still running, and nearly fell when he finally stopped. He bent over, hands on knees, sucking air. "Easy there," a voice said. "Catch your breath before you pass out." Elias looked up at the speaker, a man in his 50s wearing a star pinned to his coat and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. Behind him, 4 deputies sat with hands resting casually near their weapons. "You're the marshal," Elias managed. "Henry Webb, though I suspect you already knew that, given how you were hollering my name." "Different Webb from the doctor?" "Cousin. And you'd be Elias Crow, unless I miss my guess. Harrison sent word you might be trying to find me." Relief flooded through Elias so completely his knees went weak. He got out. He got back to town. He did. And he told me a story about a widow, a debt that isn't a debt, and a man named Vint who's been using my territory to run his own version of law. Marshal Webb dismounted, studying Elias with sharp eyes. You look like you've been through hell to get here. High pass. Needed to reach you before Vint could. Well, you've reached me. Now tell me why I should believe Harrison's story over what the local law says. Elias straightened, forcing his exhausted body to some semblance of dignity. Because the local law is bought and paid for by the man they're supposed to be watching. Because a widow and 2 children are hiding on a mountain while armed men hunt them like animals. And because 3 days ago, I heard shots fired in the direction of my cabin. And I don't know if they're still alive. The marshal's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Truth's a flexible thing in my experience. Everyone's got their own version. Then come see for yourself. Come to the cabin. Talk to Lydia Hale. Look at the evidence. If after that you think Vint's in the right, I'll help you bring them in myself. Marshal Webb studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to his deputies. What do you boys think? One of them, younger than the others with a face that hadn't lost its idealism yet, spoke up. Man runs himself half to death over a high pass in winter. He's either telling the truth or he's crazy. Could be both, another deputy said. Could be, the marshal agreed, but Harrison Webb's never steered me wrong before, and he seemed mighty certain about this. He looked back at Elias. All right, Crow, we'll ride to your cabin. But if this turns out to be some kind of ambush or con, you'll find yourself wishing you'd stayed on your mountain. It's not. We'll see. They gave Elias a horse, a solid mare who didn't seem to mind carrying a man who could barely stay in the saddle. The ride back to the main trail took hours, the marshal setting a pace that was quick but sustainable. Elias used the time to tell the full story, starting with the knock on his door and ending with his climb over the pass. The marshal listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing. When Elias finished, there was a long silence broken only by the sound of hooves on frozen ground. You're telling me you've been harboring a wanted woman, the marshal finally said. I'm telling you I gave shelter to refugees. That's not how Vint will see it. Don't much care how Vint sees it. You will if he decides to press charges, interfering with a legal debt collection, harboring a fugitive, possibly conspiracy. He could make your life very difficult. He can try. The marshal almost smiled. You're either very brave or very stupid. I'm tired and worried, and I don't have patience for games. You want to arrest me? Arrest me. But first, let's make sure the people I left behind are still breathing. Fair enough. They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, the deputies rotating watch while the marshal and Elias sat by the fire. The lawman pulled out a pipe, tamped tobacco into it, and lit it with a stick from the flames. Harrison told me you were a Union sharpshooter, Webb said, smoke wreathing his head. Said you could drop a man at 300 yards. War's over. Is it? Sometimes I wonder. We traded one kind of fighting for another. Instead of North and South, it's the powerful against the powerless, rich against poor, men like Vint against women like Mrs. Hale. You believe me, then? I believe Harrison. I believe a man doesn't risk what you've risked over a lie. And I believe that if even half of what you've told me is true, Vint needs to answer for it. Webb puffed his pipe thoughtfully. But believing and proving are different things. I'll need to see evidence, talk to witnesses, build a case that can stand up in court. What about the bounty? The men hunting her? If they're acting outside the law, I'll deal with them. But Vint's smart. He'll have covered himself legally, made everything look proper and justified. Breaking that down will take time. Time we might not have. Then we'd better move fast. The next morning, they rode hard for the mountain. The marshal knew the trails well, choosing routes that avoided the most obvious approaches. By mid-afternoon, they'd reached the lower slopes, and Elias felt his anxiety ratcheting higher with each mile. The cabin, when it finally came into view through the trees, looked intact. No smoke from burning, no bodies in the snow, no signs of battle. But something was different. Elias couldn't place it at first, then realized what had changed. The door was barred from the outside. That's not right, he said, spurring his horse forward. Crow, wait! The marshal started, but Elias was already moving. He reached the cabin and dismounted in one motion, running to the door. The heavy timber bar he'd made for interior defense had been moved outside and wedged into place, trapping whoever was inside. "Lydia!" he shouted, pulling at the bar. "Noah!" A muffled sound from within, voices, maybe, or movement. The bar was heavy, set deep, meant to hold against force. Elias threw his weight against it, felt it shift. Then one of the deputies was there helping, and the bar came free with a crack like gunfire. Elias kicked the door open and stumbled inside, rifle ready, expecting the worst. What he found was almost more shocking than violence. The cabin was intact. Lydia stood by the stove, unharmed, a revolver in her hand pointed at the floor. Noah held his rifle at the window. Emily sat in the corner with Annabelle, and Walter lay by the fire, pale but alive. And tied to one of Elias's chairs, gagged and furious, was a man Elias had never seen before. "You came back," Lydia said, and the relief in her voice nearly broke him. "What happened?" "We had a visitor," Noah said, not taking his eyes off the bound man. "He came yesterday claiming to be lost, needing help, but Ma recognized him from town. One of Vince's men." The marshal and his deputies crowded into the doorway, taking in the scene. Webb's eyebrows rose. "Well now, this is interesting." The bound man made angry sounds through his gag. The marshal nodded to one of his deputies, who removed it. "You got no right to hold me," the man spat immediately. "I'm working on legitimate business for Mr. Vint." "What business?" the marshal asked mildly. "Collection. Woman owes money. I'm here to collect." "By lying about being lost? By trying to gain entry under false pretenses?" The man's face reddened. "She's a thief and a debtor. Law's on my side." "We'll see about that." The marshal turned to Lydia. "Mrs. Hale, I presume?" "Yes, sir." "I'm Marshal Henry Webb. I'd like to hear your side of this story, from the beginning, if you don't mind." What followed was hours of testimony. Lydia told her story. The debt, Samuel's death, Vince's demands, the flight into the mountains. Noah corroborated, adding details about the men who'd tracked them, the threats made, the warning shots fired. Walter, despite his pain, provided context about Vince's reputation in Flatridge, about the corruption of local law, about the pattern of abuse against those who couldn't fight back. The marshal listened to all of it, taking notes, asking sharp questions, his expression never revealing what he was thinking. When they finished, he turned to Vince's man. "You want to change your story? Add anything? Now's the time." The man's jaw worked. "She owes money. That's all that matters." "What was the original amount of the debt?" the marshal asked. $300. "And what was it secured against?" The man hesitated. "Against, services." "What kind of services?" Silence. "I'll ask again. What kind of services?" "Whatever Mr. Vint deemed appropriate." The marshal's expression went cold. So a widow whose husband died owing money was expected to provide unnamed services to work off that debt. Services that Mr. Vint would define. Does that about sum it up? That's legal. That's indentured servitude at best and slavery at worst, and neither is legal in this territory. Webb stood, his voice hard. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back to Flatridge with my deputies. You're going to tell Mr. Vint that Marshal Webb wants to see his books, his contracts, and his version of what constitutes legal debt collection. And you're going to tell him that if he's got problems with that, he can take it up with the territorial governor." The man paled. "Vint's not going to like this." "I suspect he won't, but that's his problem, not yours." The marshal gestured to his deputies. "Get him out of here." They hauled Vince's man out of the cabin, still protesting, and the sudden silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken relief. "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Vince got money and influence. This won't end cleanly. But it will end. Eventually. Might take time, might get ugly, but yes. Men like him can delay justice, but they can't stop it forever." Webb looked at Elias. "You did good, Crow. Better than good." Elias felt the exhaustion of the past days crash over him all at once. He sat down hard in the nearest chair, his hands shaking with relief and spent adrenaline. Emily appeared at his side, Annabelle clutched tight. "You kept your promise." "I did." "Annabelle knew you would." "Annabelle's very smart." The little girl hugged him, and this time Elias hugged back, not caring who saw or what it might mean. That night the cabin was crowded. Elias, Lydia, the children, Walter, and 2 deputies the marshal had left behind for protection. The marshal himself had ridden for Flatridge to confront Vint directly, promising to return within 3 days. They ate together, talking quietly, the weight of crisis finally lifting enough to allow something like normalcy. Noah actually smiled when one of the deputies told a story about a horse thief who'd hidden in a church and been caught when he sneezed during prayer. Emily made Annabelle dance, her child's laughter filling spaces that had held only fear and tension. And Lydia, standing at the stove making coffee, looked at Elias across the crowded cabin and smiled, tired and worn but genuine. Later, after the children were asleep and the deputies had taken watch positions outside, Elias and Lydia sat by the fire alone. "I thought you were dead," she said quietly. "When I heard those shots and you didn't come back, I thought Vince's men had found you on the trail. Were warning shots. I fired at 2 riders who got too close the morning I left. Didn't want to mention it, didn't want to worry you more. Too late for that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the mountain. "What happens now?" Lydia asked eventually. "Now the law does its job. Marshall seems like the real thing, not another man in Vince's pocket. He'll investigate, build a case, probably bring charges. And we just wait? We wait, we stay safe, and we trust that sometimes the system works the way it's supposed to." "That's a lot of trust." "I know." Lydia turned to look at him directly. "When this is over, when Vince dealt with and we're free to go anywhere, what will you do?" "Come back here, I suppose. It's my home." "Is it? Or is it just where you've been hiding?" The question landed harder than it should have. Elias found himself unable to answer, unsure of what the truth even was anymore. "You could come with us," Lydia said softly. "Wherever we end up. There's always room for someone who—" "Don't," Elias interrupted gently. "Don't offer me something out of gratitude or obligation." "That's not what this is." "Isn't it?" She was quiet for a moment. "Maybe it started that way. When you first let us in, when you first stood up to those men, maybe I just saw you as a protector, a means to survival." She paused. "But somewhere along the way, that changed. I started seeing the man underneath the isolation, started understanding why someone would choose this mountain, and started wondering what it would take for them to choose something else. Lydia, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not even asking for answers. I'm just saying that when this is over, you have choices. And one of them doesn't have to be coming back here alone." Before Elias could respond, one of the deputies called softly from outside. "Rider coming, single horse, moving slow." Both of them were on their feet instantly, Elias reaching for his rifle. Through the window they could see a figure on horseback emerging from the trees, hands raised in a gesture of peace. It was Marshal Webb. He dismounted stiffly, looking exhausted and grim. Elias met him at the door. "That was fast," Elias said. "Thought you'd be gone 3 days." "So did I," Webb said, "but things moved quicker than expected." He stepped inside, accepted coffee from Lydia, and sat down heavily. "Vince dead." The words fell into silence like stones into still water. "How?" Lydia asked. "Sheriff shot him. Claimed self-defense, said Vint pulled a gun when confronted with my questions about the debt collection practices." Webb's expression was skeptical. "Convenient timing, if you ask me." "You think the sheriff killed him to silence him?" Elias said. "I think the sheriff realized that if Vint talked, he'd go down too. Better to have a dead partner than a living witness." Webb drank his coffee, bitter and dark. "I've got no proof, of course, and the sheriff's story is plausible enough that I can't disprove it." "So he gets away with it," Lydia said, her voice flat. "Probably. But here's the thing. Without Vint, the whole operation collapses. The debts he claimed, the men he employed, the influence he bought, it all dies with him." Webb looked at Lydia directly. "You're free, Mrs. Hale. Completely and legally free. The debt's gone, the bounty's canceled, and no one has legal grounds to touch you or your children." Lydia's hands started shaking. She set down her cup carefully, as if afraid she might drop it. "Just like that?" "Just like that." "And the sheriff?" Will probably drink himself to death in 5 years from guilt and whiskey. Or maybe he'll sleep fine. Men like him usually do. Webb stood. I'll file my report with the territorial government. There'll be an investigation, but I doubt much will come of it. Meanwhile, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. You're free. The word hung in the air, free, carrying weight and possibility, and the strange emptiness of suddenly having no enemy to fight. After Webb left to sleep outside with his deputies, Lydia stood at the window staring out at darkness. I should feel relieved, she said, happy even, but all I feel is tired and sad and angry that it ended this way. Because you wanted justice, not just survival. Is that wrong? No, it's human. She turned to face him. What do we do now? Just pack up and leave like none of this happened? We take time. We breathe. We figure out what comes next without people trying to kill us. And you? Will you stay here alone while we figure that out? Elias looked around the cabin, his sanctuary for 15 years, his refuge from a world he'd grown to distrust. It looked different now, marked by the presence of others, filled with sounds and smells and memories that hadn't existed a week ago. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in a long time, I honestly don't know. Lydia smiled, sad and understanding. That's all right. We've got time now to figure it out. And for once, they did. The days that followed Vince's death moved with the strange slowness of aftermath, when crisis has passed, but the body hasn't yet learned to stop bracing for impact. Marshal Webb stayed 2 more days, taking statements and finalizing his report, then rode out with his deputies and a promise to send word if anything changed. The cabin felt emptier after they left, but it was a different kind of empty than Elias had known before. Not the hollow silence of isolation, but the quiet that comes after storms when you're still counting who survived. Walter's foot was healing slowly, the infection beaten back by Webb's diligent care and Lydia's constant attention. The old teacher could sit up now without grimacing, could carry on conversation without drifting into fever dreams, though he'd never walk without a limp again. He accepted this with the stoicism of someone who'd taught himself long ago that life rarely offered fair trades. Could be worse, he said one morning while Lydia changed his bandages. Could be dead. Instead, I'm alive in a warm cabin with good people. That's more than most can say. You'll need somewhere to stay once you're well enough to travel, Lydia said. The school in Flat Ridge won't have me back, Walter finished. I helped you escape, helped hide you from what they thought was legitimate law. Town won't forget that, even with Vint dead. Then you'll come with us, wherever we end up. Walter smiled, tired but genuine. I'd like that. Been teaching other people's children for 40 years. Might be nice to have something like family of my own, even if it came late. Elias listened from his post by the window, where he'd taken to spending his mornings watching the mountain wake. Spring was coming early this year, the snow beginning its slow retreat, revealing brown earth and the promise of green underneath. Another few weeks and the trails would be passable. Another month, and the mountain would transform from fortress to garden. And then what? The question sat in his chest like a stone. Noah found him there after breakfast, the boy moving with his usual quiet competence. He'd grown in the weeks since they'd arrived, not in height, but in presence. The frightened child who'd stumbled through the door had been replaced by someone harder, more capable, someone who understood that survival sometimes required difficult choices. Can I ask you something? Noah said. You just did. The boy almost smiled. Ma says we'll be leaving soon, once the snow melts enough for Mr. Kemp to travel safely. That's probably smart. She also says you might not come with us. Elias glanced at him. She say why? Says you've got a life here. Says it wouldn't be fair to ask you to give it up. What do you think? Noah was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think you already gave it up. The day you let us in, this stopped being just your cabin. And I don't think you can go back to being alone now, even if you wanted to. You're young to be that certain about people. I'm young to be a lot of things. Doesn't make me wrong. Elias studied the boy's face, seeing strength there that most adults never found. Your pa would be proud of you. Would he? I barely remember him anymore. Sometimes I try to picture his face and it's just blank. Noah's voice roughened. That scares me, that I'm forgetting. Forgetting faces doesn't mean forgetting what they taught you. You're brave because he taught you to be. You're loyal because he showed you how. Those things don't fade. Is that what you tell yourself? About the people you lost in the war? The question cut deeper than the boy probably intended. Elias took his time answering. The people I lost in the war taught me how to survive, how to keep breathing when everything else stopped making sense. It took me 15 years to realize that surviving isn't the same as living. What's the difference? Living means being part of something bigger than yourself, means caring about people even when it hurts, means choosing connection over safety. Elias paused. Your ma figured that out a long time ago. I'm still learning. Noah nodded slowly, processing this. Then he said something that surprised them both. I hope you keep learning with us. Before Elias could respond, Emily's voice rang out from inside. Noah! Mr. Crow, come quick! They rushed in to find her standing at the table, her doll propped carefully against a makeshift chair she'd built from kindling. But what drew everyone's attention was the paper spread in front of her, a drawing rendered in charcoal from the stove. It showed the cabin, crude but recognizable, with stick figures standing in front. 5 of them. Lydia and the children were easy to identify. Walter sat off to one side, his injured foot carefully detailed. And beside Lydia, almost the same height, stood a figure that could only be Elias. It's us, Emily announced proudly. Our family. The word landed in the quiet cabin like a bell tone, resonating in ways the little girl couldn't possibly understand. Lydia's hand went to her mouth. Walter's eyes misted. Noah looked at the drawing, then at Elias, waiting. That's real good, Emily, Elias managed. Real good. Do you like it? Annabelle helped. I like it very much. Emily beamed, carefully rolling up the drawing. I'm going to keep it forever so I always remember. After she'd skipped away to show Walter, Lydia moved to stand beside Elias. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, both staring at the space where the drawing had been. She doesn't understand what she's asking, Lydia said quietly. Doesn't understand that family isn't something you just decide on a whim. Isn't it? Seems to me the best families are chosen, not given. Elias, I'm not saying yes, not saying no either. Just saying that maybe a 6-year-old sees things clearer than adults who've spent too long making everything complicated. Lydia turned to look at him, searching his face. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know yet, but I'm trying to figure it out. The thaw continued, steady and irreversible. Each day brought new sounds, dripping water, cracking ice. The first tentative calls of birds returning from wherever they'd fled the winter. The mountain was waking, and with it came decisions that couldn't be postponed forever. One afternoon, Elias found himself alone with Lydia, while the children played outside under Noah's watchful supervision, and Walter dozed by the fire. She was mending clothes, her needle moving with practiced efficiency, and he was supposed to be repairing a broken snowshoe, but found himself just watching her work instead. You're staring, she said without looking up. Just thinking. About? About what you said. That night after the marshal left. About choices. Lydia's hands stilled. And I've spent 15 years convincing myself that being alone was a choice I made freely, that I wanted the silence, the solitude, the freedom from other people's needs and problems. He set down the snowshoe. But maybe I was just scared. Maybe I came up here because it was easier than risking what happens when you let people matter. What does happen? They leave, or they die, or they see who you really are and decide it's not worth staying. Lydia set down her mending and moved to sit beside him. Samuel died in my arms after 3 days of fever. I watched him slip away one breath at a time, unable to do anything except hold his hand and lie that everything would be all right. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held old pain. When he was gone, I had 2 choices. Close myself off, protect what was left by refusing to risk it again, or stay open, stay vulnerable, and trust that even if love ends in loss, it's still worth having while it lasts. Which did you choose? Both, I think. I closed off parts of myself to survive, but I stayed open enough to hope. She paused. Coming to your door was an act of hope. Asking you to help was faith. And somewhere in all this, I started hoping, and having faith in something more than just survival. Lydia, let me finish. I know you're not ready. I know this is all happening fast and none of us planned for it. But when we leave here, when we find somewhere new to start over, I need you to know something. She met his eyes directly. You wouldn't be a burden. You wouldn't be someone we're taking out of pity or obligation. You'd be someone we want, someone we choose. And if that's too much, if you need to stay here and live the life you built, I'll understand. But don't stay because you think you're not worthy of something different. The words hung between them, honest and raw and impossible to dismiss. Elias wanted to argue, to explain all the reasons why following them was a terrible idea, why he was too damaged and too set in his ways and too likely to disappoint them eventually. But looking at Lydia's face, at the strength and certainty there, the arguments died before he could voice them. I'll think on it, he said finally. That's all I'm asking. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He lay in his bedroll near the fire, listening to the sounds of the cabin. Walter's rattling snore, the soft breathing of the children, the occasional pop and hiss of burning wood. Sounds that had become familiar over the past weeks, that had transformed his sanctuary into something else entirely. He rose quietly and stepped outside into cold night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in the way they only got at altitude. He'd spent hundreds of nights standing in this exact spot, looking at these same stars, finding comfort in their distance and indifference. But tonight they just looked lonely. Can't sleep either? Elias turned to find Noah emerging from the cabin, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. The boy came to stand beside him, looking up at the sky. Sometimes I come out here and try to find the patterns, Noah said. The hunters and the bears and all the stories Mr. Kemp taught us about the stars. But mostly, I just see dots. The patterns are made up anyway. People saw randomness and needed it to mean something, so they drew lines and told stories. Is that bad? No, it's human. Elias paused. We're all just trying to find patterns in chaos, trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. Noah considered this. Is that what you're doing? Trying to find a pattern? Something like that. What if there isn't one? What if you're just supposed to decide what the pattern should be? Elias looked at the boy, surprised. That's a complicated thought for the middle of the night. Ma says I think too much. Says I should let myself just be a kid sometimes. Noah pulled the blanket tighter. But I can't. Not after everything. I keep thinking about what comes next, about where we'll go, about whether we'll be safe. You'll be safe. Your ma will make sure of it. I know, but I'd feel safer if you were there too. The simple honesty of it hit Elias square in the chest. Noah, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty or obligated. I'm just saying that you being there would matter, to all of us, but especially to me. The boy's voice cracked slightly. Pa's gone. Mr. Kemp's a good man, but he's not family. You could be, if you wanted. Elias had faced down enemy soldiers, survived winters that killed stronger men, built a life from nothing but will and stubbornness. But standing there listening to a 10-year-old boy offer him something he'd stopped believing he deserved, he found himself completely undone. I'll think on it, he said again, because it was all he could manage. Okay. Noah turned to go back inside, then stopped. Thank you for teaching me about the rifle, about being ready, about all of it. You're welcome. After the boy disappeared into the cabin, Elias stood alone under the stars for a long time, trying to find patterns in the chaos and coming up empty. The next week brought Walter's first attempts at walking. They fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch, padded with cloth, and watched as the old teacher took halting steps around the cabin. He fell twice, cursed colorfully both times, then got up and tried again. Stubborn old fool, he muttered after the third fall. Stubborn's what's keeping you alive, Lydia pointed out. That and excellent medical care, and good company, and the fact that staying in this cabin beats the alternative. Walter made it to the table and sat down heavily, triumph written on his face. There. Progress. Progress indeed, Lydia agreed. Another few weeks and you'll be ready to travel. The words created a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Travel meant leaving. Leaving meant decisions. Emily, oblivious to the tension, brought her doll over to show Walter. Annabelle says Mr. Kemp is very brave. Well, you tell Annabelle that Mr. Kemp is mostly just tired and sore, but he appreciates the sentiment. She also says we should all stay together, that families shouldn't split up. Walter's expression softened. Annabelle's very wise. I know, she knows everything. After Emily wandered away again, Walter looked at Elias. The girl's not wrong, about families staying together. She's 6 years old with a cloth doll. She doesn't understand how the world works. Doesn't she? Seems to me she understands better than most of us. She sees people she cares about and wants to keep them close. That's not naive. That's just honest. Walter adjusted his crutch. You going with them when they leave? Haven't decided. What's holding you back? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Fear, mostly. Of what? Of needing them. Of them needing me and me failing them. Of building something that matters and watching it fall apart. All reasonable fears, Walter acknowledged. Also all guaranteed to happen eventually if you live long enough. People die. Things fall apart. Nothing lasts forever. He paused. But that's not an argument for avoiding connection. That's an argument for appreciating it while you have it. You sound like a teacher. I am a teacher. Was a teacher. Still am, I suppose, even without a school. Walter smiled. And here's what 40 years of teaching taught me. People are terrified of the wrong things. They fear loss and pain and change, when what they should fear is numbness, safety. The slow death of never risking anything. That what you tell yourself when your foot's throbbing? That's what I tell myself when I remember that I'm alive. In pain, surrounded by people who matter, instead of dead and frozen on a mountain somewhere. Pain means you're still in the game. Elias didn't have an answer for that. The snow continued its retreat, revealing a landscape transformed. Where there had been white silence, now there were patches of brown earth, the green shoots of early plants, the tracks of animals emerging from winter dens. The mountain was coming back to life, and with it came the sense that time was running out for procrastination. One evening, Lydia sat down beside Elias and handed him something wrapped in cloth. I made this for you, thought you might want it. He unwrapped it to find a journal, pages bound together with rawhide, a cover made from scraped leather, everything stitched by hand with remarkable precision. For what? He asked. For whatever you want. Thoughts, memories, records of the year. Or nothing at all. Just thought you might like to have it. Elias ran his fingers over the leather, feeling the care that had gone into making it. This took work. I had time. And I wanted to make something that would last. He understood what she wasn't saying, that she was giving him a gift that presumed a future, that assumed he'd have things worth recording, that bet on him choosing something other than the hermit's life he'd known. Thank you, he said. You're welcome. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Outside, night sounds had changed with the thaw. The hoot of an owl, the distant call of wolves, the drip of melting ice. Spring sounds, new beginning sounds. I need to tell you something, Elias said finally. About the war. About why I really came here. Lydia turned to face him, giving him her full attention. I was a sharpshooter, like people said. Good at my job. Too good, maybe. He stared into the fire, seeing old ghosts in the flames. Killed a lot of men. Told myself it was duty, that they were the enemy, that war made it necessary. And maybe all that was true, but it didn't change what it did to me. What did it do? Made me good at ending things. Good at creating silence where there used to be life. And after the war ended, I couldn't figure out how to do the opposite. How to create instead of destroy. How to build instead of tear down. He paused. So I came here. Figured if I couldn't build, at least I could stop destroying. Could just exist without hurting anyone. But that's not living. No, it's not. It's just a slower kind of dying. Lydia reached over and took his hand. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it anchored him in ways he couldn't articulate. The war made you someone you didn't want to be, she said, but it didn't make you incapable of being someone else. These past weeks you've been protective, thoughtful, brave. You've taught Noah, comforted Emily, helped Walter, kept all of us safe. She squeezed his hand. That's not destroying, that's building. You've just been doing it without noticing. What if I mess it up? What if I can't be what you need? What if you can? What if the only thing stopping you is the story you've been telling yourself about who you are? Elias thought about that, about the narrative he'd constructed over 15 years, about the hermit who chose solitude, about the damaged soldier who couldn't be trusted around decent people, about whether any of it had ever been true or just convenient. I never had a wife, he said suddenly. Never had family, never had children. Came up here alone and figured I'd die alone. That was the plan. Plans change. Do they? Mine did. I planned to grow old with Samuel, raise our children on the homestead, live a quiet life. Then he died, and Vint happened, and I ended up on a mountain with a man who claims he wants to be alone but can't seem to stop caring about people. She smiled. If my plans can change, yours can too. Emily's voice interrupted from the sleeping area. Ma? I can't sleep. Lydia rose, squeezing Elias's hand one more time before letting go. Coming, sweetheart. She moved to comfort her daughter, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts and a handmade journal that implied a future he wasn't sure he deserved, but was starting to want anyway. The decision came not with drama or revelation, but with a simple moment of clarity that felt inevitable in retrospect. Elias was standing outside watching sunrise paint the peaks gold and pink when Noah joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Ma made it, the boy said, handing one over. Said you probably needed it. Your ma's usually right. They stood in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching light spread across the valley. Down below, Flatridge was waking, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant sound of a rooster announcing the day. Life continuing as it always had, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in the mountains above. We're leaving tomorrow, Noah said quietly. Mr. Kemp's strong enough now and the trails are clear. Ma says it's time. I know. Are you coming? Elias looked at the boy, at the hope and fear mixed equally on his young face, at the strength he'd earned through hardship, at the future he was trying to build from broken pieces, and realized that the answer had been there all along, waiting for him to stop being afraid long enough to see it. Yes, he said, I'm coming. Noah's face transformed, relief and joy breaking through the careful composure he'd maintained for so long. Really, your ma's right. I've been telling myself a story about who I am for too long. Time to see if I can be someone different. You already are someone different. You just needed to notice. Elias smiled, ruffling the boy's hair in a gesture that felt natural and right. When did you get so wise? Had good teachers. They went inside to tell the others. Lydia's eyes filled when Elias told her he was coming, but she didn't let the tears fall, just hugged him hard and whispered, "Thank you," against his shoulder. Walter clapped him on the back and said he'd known all along. And Emily made Annabelle do a victory dance that involved spinning in circles until she got dizzy and fell down laughing. That night, they packed together. Elias sorted through 15 years of accumulated solitude, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Most of it stayed, the cabin, the furs, the carefully ordered life that had kept him safe and slowly suffocated him. He took his rifle, basic supplies, the journal Lydia had made, and Emily's drawing of their family. Everything else could remain as monument or warning, depending on how you looked at it. The next morning dawned clear and mild, perfect for travel. They loaded Walter onto a makeshift stretcher that Elias and Noah would carry in shifts, packed what supplies they could manage, and took one last look at the cabin that had sheltered them all. Strange, Lydia said, leaving a place that saved our lives. It's just a building, Elias said. What saved us was the choices we made inside it. She smiled at that, then turned to the children. Ready? Ready, Noah confirmed. Emily nodded, clutching Annabelle. They started down the mountain as the sun climbed toward noon. The trail was muddy from snowmelt, treacherous in places, but they moved carefully and helped each other over the difficult sections. Walter bore the journey with stoic determination, cracking occasional jokes to lighten the mood. Emily sang songs she'd learned from her father, her child's voice carrying across the slopes. Noah ranged ahead and behind, still vigilant, still protective, but with less fear than before. And Elias, walking beside Lydia with his rifle slung over his shoulder and his small pack on his back, felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years: anticipation. Not for safety or solitude or the absence of threat, but for what might be built from connection and risk, and the choice to be part of something larger than himself. They made camp that first night in a sheltered valley, the cabin invisible behind and above them, flat ridge still miles ahead. Sitting around the fire, they talked about possibilities, where they might go, what they might do, how they'd build a new life from the wreckage of the old. "There's homestead land in Montana," Walter suggested. "Still some good country available for those willing to work it." "Could teach again," Lydia said. "Between you and me, we could start a school, give children something better than what Flatridge offered." "I could help with that," Noah said. "Maybe learn to be a teacher myself someday." "What about you?" Emily asked Elias. "What will you do?" He thought about it, about skills learned in war and refined in isolation, about whether any of them translated to peaceful life. "I can hunt, can build, can protect." He paused. "Can learn to do other things too, if there's people willing to teach me." "We can teach each other," Lydia said. "That's what families do." The words still felt strange in his mouth, weighted with meaning and promise and the terrifying vulnerability of caring. But sitting there with these people who'd stumbled into his life and refused to stumble back out, Elias found himself willing to try it on. Family. Not the one he was born into or the one the army made, but the one he'd chosen by opening a door in a snowstorm and deciding that some things mattered more than safety. They reached Flat Ridge 3 days later, walking straight through town with heads high. People stared. The widow who'd fled, the mountain hermit who'd hidden her, the children and the old teacher who'd defied the town's corrupt law. But no one moved to stop them. Vint was dead, his influence broken, and whatever authority remained was smart enough to recognize that some fights weren't worth having. Marshal Webb met them at the edge of town, tipping his hat. "Heard you were coming down. Wanted to make sure you had safe passage." "Appreciate it," Elias said. "Where you headed?" "Montana. Going to try our hand at homesteading." Webb nodded approvingly. "Good country up there. Hard country, but good. You'll do well." He handed Lydia an envelope. "Found this in Vint's office when we were going through his papers. Deed to your old homestead, marked paid in full, dated the day your husband died." Lydia opened it with shaking hands, read the contents, and looked up with tears streaming down her face. "Samuel paid the debt. Before he died, he paid everything. Vint hid it, claimed the debt was still outstanding so he could leverage you." Webb's expression was grim. "For what it's worth, the sheriff who killed him is facing charges now. Turns out several people had grievances once they felt safe enough to speak up." "Justice, finally," Walter said. "Some justice. Never as much as we'd like, but some." Webb shook their hands one by one. "Take care of yourselves. And if you're ever back this way, look me up. I'd like to hear how things turned out." They sold the homestead to a young family just starting out, taking enough money for supplies and travel, but leaving the rest to help these new homesteaders avoid the debts that had destroyed Samuel. Then they bought a wagon, loaded their possessions, and turned north toward Montana and whatever waited there. The journey took weeks, following trails that wound through mountains and valleys, past settlements and wilderness, through weather fair and foul. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's strengths and weaknesses, each other's stories. Walter taught the children reading and arithmetic in the evenings. Noah learned to drive the wagon. Emily collected stones and flowers and made up elaborate tales about Annabelle's adventures. Lydia managed everything with quiet competence, somehow making whatever they had stretch to meet whatever they needed. And Elias found himself settling into a role he'd never imagined: protector, provider, partner. Someone who belonged not through blood or obligation, but through choice continuously renewed. They reached Montana as summer painted the high country green and gold, filed a claim on land near a river, with mountains rising to the west and grassland rolling east. Good water, good soil, good timber for building. Everything they needed to start over. The first thing they built was a cabin, larger than Elias's mountain sanctuary, designed for a family. They worked together, Walter directing from a chair while his foot continued healing, Noah and Elias doing the heavy lifting, Lydia chinning logs while Emily collected moss for chinking. It took weeks of hard labor, but when it was finished, it was theirs completely. The first night in their new home, they gathered around the fireplace Elias had built from river stone. The children were exhausted, barely making it through supper before falling asleep. Walter had retired to his room. They'd built him one off the main space, private but connected, and Lydia and Elias sat together listening to the night sounds of their new country. "Think it'll work?" Lydia asked. "All of this?" "I don't know, but I think it's worth trying." "That's different from how you talked back on the mountain. More hopeful." "That's what happens when you stop being alone. Hope starts seeming possible again." She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and natural. "I'm glad you came. Glad you took the risk." "Me too." They sat in silence, watching their fire burn, listening to their children breathe, feeling the weight and promise of the life they were building together. Outside, stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. But inside this cabin, in this moment, there was warmth and belonging, and the fragile, precious thing they'd all chosen to protect, each other. Elias had spent 15 years on a mountain, convinced that solitude was strength and connection was weakness, had built a life from absence and told himself it was enough. But sitting here with Lydia's weight against his shoulder and the sound of children sleeping peacefully, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring work and challenge, and the complicated joy of being needed, he finally understood what he'd been missing. Not safety, not peace, not even happiness exactly. Just the simple, profound gift of belonging somewhere, of being part of something that mattered, of choosing, every day, to keep choosing connection over isolation. The mountain had taught him how to survive alone. This family was teaching him how to live together. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias Crow was genuinely, completely home.